Welcome back to another explainer. Okay, so we're just going to jump right into this one today because we are unpacking a case study that is absolutely going to send shivers down your spine. We're looking at a deeply chilling true story out of the breathtaking, but honestly, sometimes terrifying mountains of Manali. But listen, we aren't just here to tell a spooky ghost story around a campfire. We're going to analyze this whole thing through a very specific lens, that really powerful and often highly dangerous intersection between severe psychological trauma and the supernatural. Basically, we're asking a terrifying question. What exactly happens when unprocessed, just crushing grief becomes an open door for something malicious in the dark? To really grasp the gravity of this, I need to drop you right into the psychological climax of our source material. Picture this. It's 3:30 a.m., freezing cold hotel room. Our narrator, Sahil, wakes up to a sound that just absolutely shouldn't be there. It's his 25-year-old friend, Samay. But Samay isn't sleeping. He's standing dead center in front of a mirror with these bloodshot, terrifyingly red eyes, and he's singing this sweet, innocent child's lullaby right to his own reflection. And the worst part? He's got these visible, deep marks on his neck, like invisible hands are just slowly choking him out. No way, right? How does a fun road trip with the guys devolve into an actual nightmare? Well, to figure that out, we gotta rewind and look at the absolute foundation of this horror. So that brings us to section 1, trauma and the trip. Okay, so our story really centers on Samay. Now, on paper, this whole trip was just a vacation, right? But in reality, his friends, Sahil, Chirag, and Arun, they were basically staging a desperate intervention to pull him out of this incredibly suffocating depression. You see, just 3 or 4 months before this, Samay's 15-year-old younger brother was killed in a truly tragic road accident on a school trip. So you can imagine, Samay's mind was just completely fractured. He's carrying this unbelievable load of grief and, likely a massive amount of survivor's guilt, too. In psychological terms, his mental defenses were entirely stripped away. He was in this highly vulnerable, fragile, subconscious state. And as we're about to see, in certain parts of the world, a shattered mind isn't just a tragedy, it's a target. Moving on to section 2, the Valley of Death. All right, so it's the third day of their trip, and honestly, things were going reasonably well. They were playing tourist, trying to keep Samay's spirits up, and they decided to drive up to the breathtaking but pretty infamous Rohtang Pass. But in that classic cheerful tourist hubris, they completely brushed off a really dire local warning. Before they headed out, their hotel receptionist gave them this very stern directive. Return before 6 p.m. And why? Because the actual name Rohtang literally translates to Valley of Death or Pile of Corpses. Yeah. The receptionist explained this deep-rooted local lore. For centuries, the story goes that anyone caught in the pass at night is found dead in the valley the next morning. Now, authorities usually just chalk it up to the freezing temps or driving accidents, but the locals, they believe this ancient, malicious, illusory entity basically stalks the pass after dark. Naturally, the four friends just kind of laughed the whole thing off as some fabricated tourist myth meant to sell souvenirs, and they drove right up, totally unbothered. Which leads us to section 3, trapped in the fog. But here's the thing about the mountains. They really don't care whether you believe in their myths or not. So they spend a few hours at the pass, and night falls. By the time they actually start their descent, it's pushing 9:15 p.m. Suddenly, this thick, just impenetrable fog rolls in out of nowhere. It drops visibility to absolute zero, forcing them into this agonizing 30-kilometer-per-hour crawl. And this right here is where the physical environment starts mirroring their psychological dread. They get stuck in a spatial loop. So they're driving blindly through this fog, right? And they spot a milestone on the side of the road that says Manali 28 km. Okay, fine. They keep driving, super tense, for another 20 minutes. Only to pass a milestone that once again says Manali 28 km. Fast forward to 11 p.m. They are exhausted, they are terrified, and the exact same milestone appears for a third time. They'd literally been driving for hours, but physically going absolutely nowhere. But honestly, the real horror wasn't the looping road. It was what, or actually who, was waiting for them at that milestone. So, the absolutely crucial thing to understand here is how this isolation started to actively mess with their heads. Because on the first 2 passes of that milestone, someone or something was waiting there. But when the friends finally broke the silence and spoke up, they realized their realities were completely fractured. Get this. At the exact same physical location, at the exact same time, Sahil saw a man sitting in a white dhoti. Chirag, he saw a little girl holding a toy. And Arun, who was driving, saw a black horse standing perfectly still, just watching them pass. That's wild, right? This entity wasn't just your standard physical ghost. It was a psychological manipulator. It was literally reaching into their individual minds and projecting completely different hallucinations for every single one of them. Okay, so by the third pass, the milestone is completely empty. They're thinking, phew, we escaped the illusions. But then, Arun, who is just white-knuckling the steering wheel at this point, tells everyone, do not look outside. Why? Because something was running right alongside their car. Now remember, they're moving at 40 kilometers per hour. That's fast for someone on foot, yet this entity was just effortlessly keeping pace. And this time, it wasn't some fractured individual hallucination. They all saw the exact same horrifying thing. A young boy, covered in dirt, with his face completely battered by these terrible wounds. And guys, this is the exact moment the psychological trap snaps shut. Think about it. How old did this boy running next to the car look? He looked exactly 15 years old. And who in that car had just lost a 15-year-old boy in a violent wounding accident? Samay. Driven by this completely unresolved, agonizing grief, Samay didn't actually feel fear in that moment. What he felt was this dangerous, tragic empathy. He literally utters the words, "Someone needs our help," rolls down his window, and actually smiles warmly at this terrifying, battered apparition running next to them. The entity had completely stopped playing parlor tricks. It specifically projected the image of a wounded 15-year-old boy for one very dark reason: to weaponize Samay's own trauma against him. Which brings us to Section 4, a haunting reflection. So Arun is absolutely panicking, right? He's mashing the central lock-in button, trying to force the window up. Eventually, the boy stops running, and he's just standing there waving at them in the rearview mirror. And Samay chillingly waves back. They finally slam on the gas, break the loop, blast past the Manali 16 km stone, and pull up to their hotel safely at around 2 a.m. They really thought they had outrun the mountain, but the entity had already come inside with them. Which brings us full circle right back to that terrifying scene at 3:30 a.m. Sahil wakes up to that lullaby. Samay is staring blankly into the mirror, and the symptoms are just horrific. The bloodshot eyes, the visible strangulation marks, that sinister but totally innocent smile. Samay's mind, which was already just hollowed out by his grief, had been completely hijacked. His friends are sitting there, paralyzed with fear, as Samay slowly turns to them, and with this childlike innocence that completely contrasts with his bruised, choked neck, he asks, "If I knock on your window at night, will you open it and help me?" And right after asking that horrifying question, he just instantly collapses, completely unconscious. Let's look at Section 5, Exorcism and Lingering Shadows. The next morning, there is absolutely zero discussion about staying. The guys are terrified, and they immediately seek out a local pundit, a traditional spiritual healer, because they knew perfectly well that medical science was not going to explain the invisible hands literally choking their friend. So let's look at this final process, because honestly, the pundit's assessment aligns perfectly with our whole psychological analysis here. The second he laid eyes on the unconscious Samay, he diagnosed the root cause. Without even being told, the pundit stated that Samay had recently suffered a massive traumatic loss. He explained that a dark entity from Rohtang had basically just worn the mask of a grieving soul because it was the easiest way to bypass Samay's shattered psychological defenses. The ritual itself was incredibly intense. We're talking warding off the evil eye, these vigorous exorcism prayers, and it all culminated in this shocking physical expulsion where Samay actually vomits up this thick, dark, entirely unnatural liquid. Now today, Samay is reportedly back to normal, but his friend Sahil, he is still plagued by nightmares of that lullaby. And that leaves us with a really profound, lingering question as we wrap up this explainer. What really happened on that dark, foggy road down from Rohtang Pass? I mean, scientifically, we know trauma physically alters the brain, right? We know extreme grief can absolutely trigger severe hallucinations and dissociation. So I want to leave this for you to ponder. Does immense grief simply break down our mental defenses, creating this literal bridge for predatory supernatural entities to cross over into our world? Or is the human mind just so powerful and the pain of loss so unimaginable that a completely shattered psyche will actually invent its own physical demons just to have something tangible to fight? It's a lot to think about. Let me know what your take is, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.